The author says, may Allah have mercy on him, وعلى هذا صريح نص الإمام الشافعي رحمه الله في تكفيره لحسن الفرد. And according to this, according to deeming the Mu'tazila as disbelievers, is the explicit text of Imam Ash-Shafi'i, may Allah have mercy upon him, in his deeming Hafs, the unique, a disbeliever. الذي كان يسميه الشافعي حفصا المنفرد. That one that Ash-Shafi'i used to call Hafs the deviant, ذمًا له, as a dispraise of, as a disparagement of him. Instead of Hafs the unique, he called him Hafs the deviant. حيث إن الحافظ عبد الرحمن بن أبي حاتم الرازي روى بإسناده إلى الربيع بن سليمان أنه حضر عبد الله بن عبد الحكم ويوسف بن عمرو بن يزيد وحفص الفرد. Because Hafiz, due to the fact that Hafiz Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Hatim al-Razi, in the book called Adab al-Shafi'i wa Manaqibuh, the etiquettes of Ash-Shafi'i and his merits, he narrated with his own chain of narration back to Al-Rabi' ibn Sulaiman that a man named Abdullah ibn Abdul Hakam was present, as well as another man named Yusuf ibn Amr ibn Yazid. And who else was present? Hafs the unique. وَكَانَ الشَّافِعِيُّ يُسَمِّيهِ حَفْصًا الْمُنْفَرِدِ. And Ash-Shafi'i used to call him Hafs the deviant. Footnote here, because the word al-fard, unique, is used for praise, and as for munfarid, the deviant, it means ash-shadh, the deviant. See the dictionary Al-Qamus. فسأل حفص عبد الله بن عبد الحكم. So Hafs asked Abdullah ibn Abdul Hakam. فقال, he said to him, he wants to start an issue. He wants to open up an issue. So he said to him, ما تقول في القرآن? What do you say about the Quran? And you know that at this time, this is controversial talk here. What if now, during our time, somebody came and said, what do you say about Allah existing without a place, or something like that? What do you say about Ibn Taymiyyah, or something? Something controversial. So he went to him, he said, what do you say about the Quran? فَأَبَى أَن يُجِيبَهُ. And so he refused to answer him. فَسَأَلَ يُوسُفَ ibn Amr ibn Yazid. So then he asked Yusuf ibn Amr ibn Yazid. So it shows you how much he wants to talk about this issue. فَلَمْ يُجِبْهُ. And he didn't respond to him. وَكِلَاهُمَا أَشَارَ إِلَى الشَّافِعِي. And both of them pointed to Ash-Shafi'i. Now that makes me wonder if he didn't really want to talk to Ash-Shafi'i in the first place, since he didn't start there. I don't know if he knew who he was or he didn't know who he was, why he didn't just go to the champ in the first place. فَسَأَلَ الشَّافِعِي. And so he asked Ash-Shafi'i. فَاحْتَجَّ عَلَيْهِ الشَّافِعِي. And so Ash-Shafi'i refuted him. He argued with him. Ash-Shafi'i debated with him. وَطَالَتْ فِيهِ الْمُنَاظَرَةِ. And the debate went long. And that's interesting in itself, that this one was able to have a long debate with Ash-Shafi'i, and Ash-Shafi'i didn't shut him down immediately. فَأَقَامَ الشَّافِعِيُّ الْحُجَّةَ عَلَيْهِ. And so Ash-Shafi'i established the evidence against him. بِأَنَّ الْقُرْآنَ كَلَامُ اللَّهِ غَيْرُ مَخْلُوقٍ. That the Quran is the speech of God, uncreated. Yani, the word Al-Quran fundamentally refers to God's very attribute of speech. Though this is not the topic for that to go into details. We already talked about that. Now we want to talk about the fact that he deemed him as a kafir. Now the Shaykh is talking about the Mu'tazila being kuffar. And in particular, he's talking about deeming the Mu'tazila as kuffar for their denial of destiny. But here the Shaykh has annexed a case, which is that Ash-Shafi'i deemed this Mu'tazili as a kafir also for another issue. وَكَفَّرَ أَيْ الشَّافِعِيُّ حَفْصًا الْفَرْدِ. And Ash-Shafi'i deemed Hafs the unique a kafir. قال الربيع. Al-Rabi' said, فَلَقِيتُ حَفْصًا الْفَرْدَ فِي الْمَجْلِسِ بعد. Al-Rabi' said, I met Hafs the unique in the session afterwards. فقال, and so he said, أراد الشافعي قتلي. Ash-Shafi'i wanted me executed. He's saying, Ash-Shafi'i called me a kafir so that he could have my head cut off. Not according to him, Ash-Shafi'i called him a kafir because he committed kufr. He's saying Ash-Shafi'i called me a kafir out of spite. He wanted to use his influence to have me beheaded. Intaha, end quote. وَقَدْ رَوَاهَا الْحَافِظُ الْبَيْهَقِيُّ بِلَفْظٍ. And Hafiz al-Bayhaqi, he related this incident according to the wording that Ash-Shafi'i said, لَقَدْ كَفَرْتَ بِاللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ. You have, by God, disbelieved in God the Great. You have blasphemed in God the Great. وهذا الكلام من حفص الفرد يدل على أن الشافعي كان يريد ظاهر اللفظ. And this talk of Hafs the unique, yani, for Hafs to say, Ash-Shafi'i wanted to get me executed. For Hafs to say that proves that Ash-Shafi'i meant what appears from the expression. الَّذِي وَصَفَ بِهِ حَفْصًا الْفَرْدِ. That phrase by which he described Hafs the unique. He called him a real, literal kafir. So for your clarity, in this rendition of Al-Bayhaqi, he mentions what was reported about Ash-Shafi'i's address to Hafs. He told him, you have by God disbelieved in God the Great. And in the previous rendition, it just says Ash-Shafi'i deemed him a kafir. Doesn't say what Ash-Shafi'i's phrase was. وَعَلَى هَذَا كَانَ ابْنُ عَبَّاسٍ. And this is what Ibn Abbas was upon, deeming the destiny deniers as blasphemers. Though the Mu'tazila, yani the official group of Mu'tazila didn't appear yet, but there were destiny deniers who appeared before Ibn Abbas died. Ibn Abbas was a youngster when the Prophet died, alayhi salatu wasalam. He was just a young teenager, maybe like 13 years old, and he died in old age. Don't remember how old was he, 80 years old or something like that. حيث أراد قتل شخص قدري أتاه به مجاهد. Because Ibn Abbas wanted to execute a destiny denier that Mujahid brought to him. Mujahid, his student. كما رواه البيهقي في السنن الكبرى, as Al-Bayhaqi narrated in السنن الكبرى. وقد روى اللالكائي عن كثير من السلف تكفير المعتزلة. And Al-Lalikai narrated from many of the Salaf that they deemed the Mu'tazila as disbelievers. فلا تكن في مرية من تكفير من قال منهم بأن العبد يخلق أفعاله. So have no doubt about deeming as a kafir any one of them who says that God's manslave creates his own actions. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And refuge with God is sought. وإياك والإصغاء إلى ما في بعض مؤلفات الشافعية. And beware of paying attention to what is in some Shafi'i works, some Shafi'i authoring's, not authoring's of Imam al-Shafi'i, authoring's of Shafi'i scholars. Footnote: in some of the Shafi'i books is the saying that it's permissible to follow the Mu'tazila in prayer. And this open statement is an ugly heedlessness. But that statement doesn't mean Mu'tazila are not kuffar. But someone could easily take that statement from this one. That's why this one is ugly. Because this open statement gives the impression that it's permissible to follow those among them who reached, who went as far as to say that the human creates his own actions. And those among them who say that Allah did not will for the occurrence of evil and sins. And this is obvious paganism. Exalted is Allah Ta'ala. So, had only the one who made that open statement not made that open statement. لأنها خالفت نص إمام المذهب. Because this statement is against, because this open statement is against the explicit documentation of the Imam of the school. فلا عبرة بها, so there's no regard given to it. وهي مردودة, and it is rejected لمخالفتها للقرآن والحديث, because of its opposing the Quran and the Hadith. وكلام الإمام رحمه الله, and because of its opposing the Imam, the talk of the Imam. May Allah have mercy on him. Don't forget that the scholar who's under the Imam of the Madhab cannot go against the Imam, because he's not an absolute mujtahid. That's what many people don't understand. They think because scholars could disagree with each other, that any scholar could disagree with any scholar, and that's not the case. No Shafi'i can disagree with Imam al-Shafi'i. وهذا في من علم منه أنه يقول بهذه المسألة وأشباهها. And this charge of blasphemy is regarding someone about whom it is known that he believes in this case and the likes of this case, that man slaves of God create their own actions, or that God is not attributed with an attribute called speech. وَأَمَّا لِمُجَرَّدِ الْإِنْتِسَابِ إِلَيْهِمْ, but as for mere affiliation with the Mu'tazila, فَلَا يُحْكَمُ عَلَيْهِ بِالْكُفْرِ كَمَا قَدَّمْنَا, then one would not be judged with blasphemy just for the mere affiliation, like we have already presented. And that's for all the deviant sects. The mere affiliation with the deviant sect is not enough to deem him as a kafir. Rather, you have to deem him as a kafir for any particular case that demands deeming him as a kafir. بِقَضِيَّةٍ مُعَيَّنَةٍ تَقْتَضِي كُفْرَهُ. قال المؤلف رحمه الله, said the author, may Allah have mercy upon him, وهي كلها بإرادته ومشيئته وحكمه وقضيته وتقديره. And they, the deeds of the man-slaves, all of them are by his will and his ruling and his judgment and his destining. SharH, the explanation. أفعال العباد بإرادة الله حاصلة. The actions of the man-slaves by the will of God they occur. أي بتخصيص الله تعالى لها بالوجود, meaning by God particularizing them with existence, specifying them with existence, specifying those deeds with existence. وَهَذَا مَعْنَى الْإِرَادَةِ وَالْمَشِيئَةِ. And this is the meaning of the will of God, which has two names in Arabic, irada and mashi'ah. What is the meaning of that? His specifying possibilities with being one way or another. وَقَوْلُهُ وَحُكْمِهِ. And when Imam An-Nasafiyyah said, and his hukum, yani his, I said ruling at first, and yani, so his ruling, his hukum, or his judgment, his hukum, ay hasilatun bi hukmillah. This means that those deeds of the manslaves are occurring by God's ruling. وَأَرَادَ بِالْحُكْمِ هُنَا الْإِرَادَةُ التَّكْوِينِيَّةُ. And what he meant by ruling here is the creating will. وَيُقَالُ إِنَّ الْحُكْمَ هُنَا الْخِطَابُ التَّكْوِينِي. And it is said that the ruling here is the creating address. The creating address. You know, the creating address goes back to when Allah said, إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَن يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. His mere saying to something, if he willed for it, is that he says to it, be, and it is. That is his creating address, meaning that things become existent by, in accordance with, things become existent in accordance with his command, and his command is his speech. So according to that, hukmuhu, his ruling, is amruhu, his command. And amruhu, his command, is kalamuhu, his speech. وَلَيْسَ الْخِطَابَ التَّكْلِيفِي. And his speech here, his creating address here, this address, which is his creating address, is not his address of accountability, his address that makes the slaves accountable, which is that he says with his eternal speech, he commands with his eternal speech for the slaves to pray and to fast, as if he says to the slaves, pray, fast, and like that. Do not sin, with his eternal speech. And he reveals revelation like the Quran and the Injil and the Torah. These revelations come in created expressions, telling us what he says with his uncreated speech, what he commands with his uncreated speech, telling us by what does he make us accountable with his uncreated speech. That is not what's meant here by his hukum, his ruling. لأن الله تعالى لا يكلف العباد بمعاصيه ولا بالمباحات. Because, how do we know that this is not the address of accountability? Because Allah, exalted is He, does not charge the slaves with committing sins, nor does He charge the slaves with doing indifferent actions. Indifferent means not rewardable nor punishable. What does this mean? Meaning, all of the deeds of God's manslaves are by his ruling. His ruling here either means his creating will, or it means his creating address. And when we talk about creating, then that includes the sins and the evil. So all of the deeds, even the sinful, evil deeds, are by his ruling, which either means his creating will or his creating address. And it can't mean here his address of accountability, because then that would mean that Allah, that would mean that since all of the deeds of the man-slaves are by his ruling, then if the ruling here was the address of accountability, that would mean that Allah Ta'ala charges the slaves with committing sins. And he does not charge the slaves with committing sins, so that's not the meaning of hukmihi here. If you have any question, feel free. Let me know if that's not clear for you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Yeah, can you go back and say it again? So
Yes. Okay. So what did Imam An-Nasafiyyah say in his matan, the text? He says, وَهِيَ كُلُّهَا بِإِرَادَتِهِ وَمَشِيئَتِهِ وَحُكْمِهِ وَقَضِيَّتِهِ وَتَقْدِيرِهِ. And they, all of them, meaning all the deeds of the slaves, including the evil ones, are by his will and his ruling and his judging or his judgment and his predestining. So the Shaykh wants to explain, what does will mean? What does, according to my translation, what does ruling mean? What does judgment mean? What does destining mean? This will, that all of the deeds, including the evil ones, are by his will. What does will mean? All of his deeds, including the evil ones, are by his ruling. So what does ruling mean? All of the man-slave's deeds, including the evil ones, are by his judgment and by his destining. So we're explaining, what does it mean for all of these deeds, including the evil ones, to be by his hukum, his ruling? So it either means his creating will, or it means
on the left side,
his will of address. And what it can't mean is his address of accountability, because hukum means amr. Amr means command. So one way to use the word command for Allah is that he commands us with doing things. He commands us to pray and to fast, and he commands us to avoid sins. This command here is not for creating. This command is just for making us accountable. This command for making us accountable is not meant here by the word hukmihi. Because then that would mean, since we're talking about all the deeds of the man-slaves, that he commanded them to do sins. And he didn't command them to do sins. So that meaning of hukum is, that can't be the meaning of hukum here. Is that clear?
it's definitely clear. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. وَأَمَّا قَوْلُهُ وَقَضِيَّتِهِ أي قضائه. And as for An-Nasafiyyah saying, and those deeds of the man-slaves are by his judgment, meaning his decree, وَالْقَضَاءُ هُنَا مَعْنَاهُ الْخَلْقِ. And decree here means creating. أي أن أفعال العباد كلها بخلق الله وتكوينه. Meaning that all of the deeds of the man-slaves are by God's creating, by God's creation. They're all by God's creation. And they are by his existence creating. حصلت. They happened by his existence creating. ولا يقال لو كان الكفر والمعصية بقضاء الله تعالى لوجب الرضا به. And it is not said that had the blasphemy and sins been by God's decree, exalted is He, it would have been obligatory to accept them, to accept the blasphemy and the sins. لأن الرضا بالقضاء واجب. Because, one would say that because accepting God's creating is obligatory. So it's not said that had this blasphemy and sin been by God's creating, it would have been obligatory to accept them. Because it is obligatory to accept God's decree. وَاللَّازِمُ بَاطِلٌ. This is an invalid argument. لأن الرضا بالكفر كفر. Because the accepting blasphemy is blasphemy. Because the acceptance of blasphemy is blasphemy. So, meaning, what does this mean here? Shaykh is saying, somebody might say, incorrectly that is, he might incorrectly say, had blasphemy and sins been by God's decree, it would have been obligatory to accept blasphemy and sins. So what does he mean? He means it's not by God's decree. But everything is by God's decree. And so since everything is by God's decree, then this argument that the person is making is actually saying that it's obligatory to accept blasphemy. And the acceptance of blasphemy is blasphemy. نقول في الجواب. So we say in response to this, الكفر مقضي لا قضاء. Blasphemy is something decreed. It's not the decree. والرضا إنما يجب بالقضاء دون المقضي. And the acceptance is only obligatory for the decree. That's God's attribute, not the decreed, which is a created thing. إن كان معصية, not the decreed thing if the decreed thing is a sin. ولا شك أننا مكلفون بالرضا بما هو محبوب لله من الأشخاص والأعمال. And there is no doubt that we are charged with accepting whatever is acceptable to Allah, whether people or deeds. Footnote, like if that decreed thing were a prophet or an angel, or worship of God, of some sort of good deeds, it is obligatory to accept all of this. قال الإمام أبو حنيفة رحمه الله في الفقه الأكبر. Said Imam Abu Hanifa, may Allah accept from him, in Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, وهي كلها بمشيئته وعلمه وقضائه وقدره. And they, أفعال العباد, meaning the actions of the man-slaves, all of them are by his will and in accordance with his knowledge and by his decree and his destiny. والطاعات كلها ما كانت واجبة بأمر الله تعالى وبمحبته وبرضائه وعلمه ومشيئته وقضائه وتقديره. And the acts of obedience, all of them, whatever was obligatory, is by God's command. So now that right there, God's command, that's the command of accountability, which is not in reference to creating. Command of accountability is not related to creating. He commands you to pray, and then you might obey or you might not obey. So it's not related to creating. And so Abu Hanifa said, and the obedience, all of it, what is obligatory is by God's command. Exalted is He, and His acceptance. بِمَحَبَّتِهِ وَبِرِضَائِهِ. Notice the kasra there. بِرِضَائِهِ. You could say also بِرِضَاهُ. You could say either of those. And in accordance with His knowledge, and by His will, and by His decree, and by His destiny. وَالْمَعَاصِي كُلُّهَا بِعِلْمِهِ وَقَضَائِهِ وَتَقْدِيرِهِ وَمَشِيئَتِهِ. And the sins, all of them are by His knowledge, that means in accordance with His knowledge, and by His decree, and His destiny, and His will, لَا بِمَحَبَّتِهِ وَلَا بِرِضَاهُ وَلَا بِأَمْرِهِ, but not by His acceptance nor His command. وَقَوْلُ الْمُؤَلِّفِ. And when the author An-Nasafiyyah said, وَتَقْدِيرِهِ, and the actions of the man-slaves, the deeds of the man-slaves are by his destining. التقدير هو تحديد كل شيء بحده الذي يوجد به. The destining, it is limiting everything to the limit by which it exists. This means making everything come out with its measure. Making everything come out with its exact measure. So that's the destining. Yani, the word qadar with the fatha on the dal, and this word taqdir, so the root letters are qaf, dal, ra. The root letters are qaf, dal, ra. The meaning of qadr with a sukoon on the dal, qadr means amount. Qadr means amount. So why is qadar called qadar with the fatha on the dal? Because, and it means destiny. Why is destiny called qadar with the fatha on the dal? Why is destiny in Arabic with these letters, qaf, dal, ra, that have the meaning of amount? Because the meaning is that everything comes out with its exact measure. Not more or less, not in any other way. That's the destiny. So the Shaykh is saying, when the author here said, وَتَقْدِيرِهِ, and all the man-slave's deeds are by God's taqdir, His destining. The taqdir is giving everything its limit. That means giving everything its exact measure. الَّذِي يُوجَدُ بِهِ, the measure that it exists with. The measure that it comes out with, yani its outcome. The outcome of everything, whatever it has, whatever is its outcome, that's the measure that God willed for it to have at any given moment. Min husnin wa qubhin wa naf'in wa dur, whether beauty or ugliness or benefit or harm. وَمَا يَحْوِيهِ مِنْ زَمَانٍ وَمَكَانٍ, and whatever it contains of time and place. وَمَا يَتَرَتَّبُ عَلَيْهِ مِنْ ثَوَابٍ وَعِقَابٍ, and whatever is related to it of reward and punishment. وَالْمَقْصُودُ تَعْمِيمُ إِرَادَةِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَقُدْرَتِهِ لِمَا مَرَّ مِنْ أَنَّ الْكُلَّ بِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And the intent is to generalize God's will, exalted is He, and His power. Yani, to make God's will universal and His power universal. That means not limited. Because of what has already passed, that all of it is by God's creation. Exalted is He. وهو يستدعي القدرة والإرادة لعدم الإكراه والإجبار. And this demands, yani, necessitates power and will because of the lack, meaning the impossibility of compulsion and coercion. Yani, God is not compelled or coerced. فإن قيل, now if it were said, فيكون الكافر مجبورا في كفره والفاسق في فسقه فلا يصح تكليفهما بالإيمان والطاعة. If it were said, يعني, if some Mu'tazili opposed us, or any destiny denier, even if he's not attributed to Islam, because if you deny destiny, then this is what you're going to arrive at. What we're talking about now, what I'm going to say to you now, this is what you would arrive at if you were to deny destiny, regardless of your religion. So if it were said, if this is the case, what you are saying, that God created all the man-slaves' actions, they're all by his will and his command, and yani, his ruling and his decree, then the disbeliever is compelled to disbelieve, and the major sinner is coerced to be nefarious, and therefore they would not even be accountable to have belief or to be obedient. So the creed of a destiny denier is that he has to be creating his own deeds, or else he would be coerced in whatever he's doing. That's why really destiny deniers, in a way, they are actually people who deny the will of the slave, because they believe what they believe, yani, what they believe leads to denying that the slaves have a choice. قلنا إنه تعالى أراد منهما الكفر والفسق باختيارهما. We say, God, exalted is He, willed for them to blaspheme and to be nefarious by their choice. فلا جبر. Therefore, there is no coercion here. There's no compulsion here by definition. By definition, there's no coercion here, because He willed for them to choose for themselves. So it is by His will. He willed for them to choose for themselves. كما أنه علم منهما الكفر والفسق بالاختيار. Just as He knew about them blasphemy and being nefarious by choice, that they would choose so. ولم يلزم من ذلك تكليف المحال. And it's not binding by His knowing that they would blaspheme and be nefarious, that they are accountable to do the impossible. فهذه حجة قاصمة لظهور المعتزلة. Shaykh says, this is an argument that breaks the backs of the Mu'tazila. This is an argument that snaps their spines. وَنَحْنُ نَقُولُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى كَلَّفَ الْعَبْدَ بِتَرْكِ الْمَعَاصِي. We say, God, exalted is He, charged the manslave with abandoning the sins. وَيُعَاقِبُهُ عَلَيْهَا إِن مَاتَ وَلَمْ يَتُبْ مِنْهَا. And He punishes the manslaves for those sins if he dies without repentance from them. Yani, that's a broad statement. You know, if he dies as a believer, Allah may forgive him. وَقَدْ عَلِمَ فِي الْأَزَلِ أَنَّ هَذَا الْعَبْدَ يَعْصِيهِ بِاخْتِيَارِهِ. And God knew in eternity that this man slave would disobey Him by his own choice. كَمَا شَاءَ وُقُوعَ ذَلِكَ مِنْهُ بِاخْتِيَارِهِ. And likewise, He willed for that to happen from the manslave by his own choice. وَلَا يَلْزَمُ مِنْ هَذَا السَّفَهُ فِي حَقِّ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And it's not binding from this that God would be foolish, because that's another thing Mu'tazili would say. They would say, then God's a fool according to you. So that's why really Mu'tazila believe, yani, what their belief really clearly implies is that God is a fool. That's why they are atheists. وَلَا الْجَوْرُ وَالظُّلْمُ, nor does it dictate that God would be unjust, كما ادعت المعتزلة, as the Mu'tazila claimed. وهم موافقون لنا في أنه علم من الكافر والعاصي أنهما يفعلان ذلك باختيارهما. Although those people agree with us that God knew about the blasphemer and the disobedient, that they would do that by their own choice. They agree with us. If we said to them, did he know he would blaspheme in eternity? He'd say, yeah, he knew it. But they disagree with us about the will. So we say to them, if you confess that he knew it, but you deny that he willed it, you'll be contradicting yourself. And that's why Ash-Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa both said, if a destiny denier confesses to the knowledge of God, then he is defeated. Well, that's what Ash-Shafi'i said, and Abu Hanifa said it with more words. He elaborated. نقول فهل يمكن لهذا العبد ألا يفعل ذلك الذي علم الله وقوعه منه? So we say to them, is it possible for this man-slave to not do what God knew would happen? See, that's how he contradicts himself. Confirming that God knew in eternity, but denying that he willed it. His contradiction is brought out by this question. Is it possible for a man-slave of God to do contrary to what God knew would happen? And then some of them would be as brazen as to say, yeah, it's possible. So they are definitely kuffar. ثم إنه علم بأنه يعصي ومع ذلك نهاه. And furthermore, yes, God knew that the disobedient would disobey, and with that knowledge, he still forbade him from disobedience. وَكَلَّفَهُ بِالْإِنْتِهَاءِ عَنِ الْمَعْصِيَةِ, and he still charged him with desistance from the disobedience. So why? So that he would be accountable. وَلَا يَكُونُ الْعَبْدُ بِذَلِكَ مَجْبُورًا, and the slave would not be by any of that coerced. وَهَذَا يَكْسِرُ ظُهُورَ الْمُعْتَزِلَةِ وَيُلْجِمُ أَلْسِنَتَهُمْ. This breaks the backs of the Mu'tazila and it silences their tongues. So what we are now discussing at this moment is one of the loftiest cases, one of the cases where someone will get swept away in confusion if his mind cannot handle the weight of this topic. وَالْمُعْتَزِلَةُ أَنْكَرُوا إِرَادَةَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى لِلشُّرُورِ وَالْقَبَائِحِ. And the Mu'tazila denied God's will, God's willing evils and bad things, ugly things. التي تحصل من العباد, those which come from the man-slaves. حتى قالوا إنه أراد من الكافر والفاسق إيمانه وطاعته لا كفره ومعصيته. To the extent that they said that actually God willed for the disbeliever to believe, and he willed for the nefarious to be obedient. He did not will for the disbeliever to disbelieve, and he did not will for the nefarious to be disobedient. It's blasphemy. زعما منهم أن إرادة القبيح منه قبيحة. Out of their claim that willing for the ugly is itself ugly. كما أنها منا قبيحة, just as performing the ugly is from us something ugly. وجواب أهل الحق منع ذلك. And the answer of the people of the truth is the impossibility of that. قالوا بل القبيح كسب القبيح والاتصاف به. The people of truth said, rather, what's ugly is to acquire the ugly deed and to be attributed with the ugly deed, not to create it. وهذا وصف العبد. And this acquisition and this attribution is the description of the man-slave, not God. ثم يقال, furthermore it is said, فكما لا يلزم من خلق الله تعالى الخنزير ونحوه نسبة القبح إلى الله تعالى, just like it's not binding from God's creation of the pig and the like, the attribution of something ugly to God, exalted is He, like the devils, for example. Even the devils is even a clearer example. You say to the Mu'tazili, who created the devils? Or you say to any person, like, did you ever talk to a Christian who denies that God creates evil? Some Christians are destiny deniers. Some of them say God didn't, many of them say God doesn't create any evil. And then you say to him, who created the devil? And then, Allah knows what they're going to say. كذلك لا يلزم من تخليق الله تعالى بمشيئته معاصي العباد القبح لله تبارك وتعالى. Likewise, it is not binding from God's creation by His will of the deeds of the slaves, His creation of the deeds of the slaves, that something ugly is attributed to God, that God has an ugly, dispraised, blameworthy attribute. Glorified and exalted is He. ويقال لهم يلزم من قولكم أن يكون أكثر ما يقع من أفعال العباد على خلاف إرادة الله تعالى. And it is said to them, it is binding from what you say that most of what occurs from the deeds of the man-slaves are against the will of God. Exalted is He. وَجَعَلْتُم مَّا يَحْصُلُ لِلْعَبْدِ مِنْ أَفْعَالِهِ الَّتِي لَا تَدْخُلُ تَحْتَ الْحَصْرِ مَخْلُوقَةً لِلْعَبْدِ. And you have made what happens from the slave, what comes forth from the slave, of his own deeds that are unlimited, you have made them to be the creation of the slave. وَجِسْمَ الْعَبْدِ فَقَطْ مَخْلُوقًا لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى. And you have made the body of the man-slave, merely the body of the man-slave, to be God's creation. Exalted is He. وَهَذَا أَمْرٌ شَنِيعٌ جِدًّا. And this is an abominable, a very abominable matter. Yeah, how can someone say these people are not kuffar when they believe like that? Subhanallah, Subhanallah. وَقَدْ حُكِيَ عَنْ عَمْرِ بْنِ عُبَيْدٍ وَهُوَ أَحَدُ زُعَمَاءِ الْمُعْتَزِلَةِ الْقُدَمَاءِ أَنَّهُ قَالَ. And it was cited about Amr ibn Ubayd, that's Wasil's henchman, his main henchman. And he's one of the leaders of the old Mu'tazila, the first ones, that he said, ما ألزمني أحد مثل ما ألزمني مجوسي. Interesting sentence. It's a regular sentence, but it's interesting for me. إلزاما مثل ما ألزمني إلزاما مثل ما يعني مثل الإلزام الذي ألزمني مجوسي. He said, no one imposed on me an argument like how that Majusi imposed on me an argument one day. That alone right there shows how pathetic he is, to be defeated by a Majusi. He said, كان معي في السفينة. This Majusi was with me in the ship. فقلت له لما لا تسلم. So I said to him, why don't you embrace Islam? فقال لأن الله تعالى لم يريد إسلامي. And so he said, because Allah did not will for my Islam. So he said the truth. This Majusi said the truth to him. But he says it with contempt though. He's being sarcastic. يعني. He said, فَإِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى إِسْلَامِي أَسْلَمْتُ. He said, if Allah willed for my Islam, then I will embrace Islam. فَقُلْتُ لِلْمَجُوسِي. So Amr said, I said to the Majusi, إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى يُرِيدُ إِسْلَامَكَ. Allah Ta'ala indeed wills for your Islam. وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَا يَتْرُكُونَكَ. However, the devils won't leave you alone. فَقَالَ الْمَجُوسِي. So the Majusi said, فَأَنَا أَكُونُ مَعَ الْغَالِبِ. He said, then I will be with the winner. I will be with the dominant one. So Amr is saying, I didn't even know what to say to that. وحكي أيضا أن القاضي عبد الجبار الهمداني وهو أيضا من رؤوس المعتزلة دخل على الصاحب ابن عباد. And it was also cited that Judge Abdul Jabbar al-Hamadani, and he's also one of the heads of the Mu'tazila, he was in the presence of, he was in the presence of As-Sahib ibn Abbad, وعنده الأستاذ أبو إسحاق الأسفرايني, and in his company was the professor Abu Ishaq al-Asfarayini, one of the masters, one of the Ash'ari masters. فَلَمَّا رَأَى الْأُسْتَاذ. So when he saw the professor, قال, he said, so professor is a title, سُبْحَانَ مَنْ تَنَزَّهَ عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ. So before I translate, I'm just going to read it, because this is a conversation that went back and forth between them, and it rhymes. Their whole going back and forth rhymes. So when he saw the professor, that deviant, he said, Subhana man tanazzaha anil fahsha. So the professor said, فقال الأستاذ على الفور. So the professor said immediately, Subhana man la yajri fi mulkihi illa ma yasha. فقال عبد الجبار. So Abdul Jabbar said, أيحب ربنا أن يعصى. فقال الأستاذ. So then the professor said, أيعصى ربنا قهرا. فقال عبد الجبار. So Abdul Jabbar said, أرأيت إن منعني الهدى وقضى علي بالردى أحسن إلي أم أساء. فقال أبو إسحاق. So Abu Ishaq said, إن منعك ما هو لك فقد أساء وإلا فهو يفعل في ملكه ما يشاء. فسكت عبد الجبار وانقطع. So Abdul Jabbar was silenced. So let me translate for you. So when he saw the professor, he said, Subhana man tanazzaha anil fahsha. Far from imperfection is he who is exalted from atrocities. He means Allah doesn't create evil. He's saying Allah is exalted from creating evil. That's blasphemy. Yani, what he means by the statement makes him commit blasphemy by these words. So the professor said immediately, Subhana. So the professor said immediately, Subhana man la yajri fi mulkihi illa ma yasha. Far from imperfection is he who nothing happens in his dominion but what he wills. So Abdul Jabbar said, أَيُحِبُّ رَبُّنَا أَن يُعْصَى? Does our Lord accept to be disobeyed? So he's saying that from the perspective of his conviction. So the professor said, أَيُعْصَى رَبُّنَا قَهْرًا? Is our Lord forced to be disobeyed? So Abdul Jabbar said, أَرَأَيْتَ إِن مَنَعَنِي الْهُدَى وَقَضَى عَلَيَّ بِالرَّدَى? Tell me, what if he deprived me of guidance and willed for me to be in hell? أَحْسَنَ إِلَيَّ أَمْ أَسَاءَ? Was he generous to me? Did he do me a favor? Or was he bad to me? Did he mistreat me? So Abu Ishaq said, إِن مَنَعَكَ مَا هُوَ لَكَ فَقَدْ أَسَاءَ. If he deprived you of something that you deserve to have, then he treated you badly. وَإِلَّا, or he did bad. وَإِلَّا فَهُوَ يَفْعَلُ فِي مُلْكِهِ مَا يَشَاءُ. But if he didn't deprive you of something that you don't have to get, then he does in his dominion whatever he wills. So then Abdul Jabbar was silenced. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Any question?
As yes.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Go back to the beginning about the definition of will. You said in the Arabic.
Yes. The definition of will?
There's two words.
Yeah. So will has two names in Arabic. Mashi'ah and irada. And the meaning of will is what Shaykh says here. A God's specifying. Yeah, that's what it means. تخصيص الله تعالى لها بالوجود. God's specifying them with existence. That's what Shaykh says here. But what I said was just a little more broad and according to what we have learned. The meaning of the will of God is his attribute by which he specifies possibilities with one way or another. Having one attribute instead of another, existing at one time instead of another. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, I'm looking for that. That's correct. Oh yeah, I need. Can you spell both of the words for me if it's possible?
Spell the two words?
Yeah, the Arabic.
Yeah. Let me type it in the chat here for you. Irada and Mashi'ah. They both mean will.
The other question I got.
Yes.
What is that? Two different names he got, or is it two different people? Half's the unique, and what was the other one?
Hafs, the unique. That's what they used to call him. But Ash-Shafi'i used to call him Hafs, the deviant.
Okay.
So the Arabic word for unique is fard. They called him Hafs al-Fard. And the word for deviant is munfarid.
That's Shafi said to call him that.
Yeah, Shafi'i didn't used to call him Hafs al-Fard. He used to call him Hafs al-Munfarid. Has the same root letters, fa, ra, dal. That's the play on the words there. Fa, ra, dal. Yeah, those are the root letters there. So they called him Hafs the unique, using the root letters fa, ra, dal. Shafi'i, he kept those root letters, but he just used a different word to dispraise him instead of praise him. So he called him Hafs al-Munfarid, Hafs the deviant.
Great, appreciate it. It looks like you don't understand the language. I mean, English or the Arabic. If you're proficient in English or Arabic, if you don't understand the language, you'll get confused. You don't know what these words mean.
Yes, and so that's very, yani, learning the Arabic is important thing, very beneficial. And even, yani, any amount of Arabic you learn is going to benefit you in your religious studies. I know one brother, he's not interested in learning Arabic at all. At all, yani. It's like he's not, yani, I don't even like his tone of voice when he speaks about Arabic. So that's too bad for him. He's deprived, he will deprive himself of a lot of comprehension.
Sure. Barakallah fi shaykh. Thank you.
Ameen wa fiq. You're welcome.